the movement of the eyes, my understanding, helps you reprogram and helps, I guess, rewrite how you remember something. And so I went through that. The actual process seems very relaxing while you're doing it. You watch these little lines go across the screen, back and forth, back and forth. You slow your breathing down while you're thinking about, whatever's causing you the most stress. You relate that back to another incident, and there will be an incident in your past where you first felt that feeling that you're feeling.
Stay tuned. Coming up in this episode, it's part 2 of my 2-part interview with Laverne Friesen, a first responder who is confronting the stigma of mental illness head-on by sharing his firsthand account of how work-related stress was leading him down a dark path towards suicide. But first, let's hear from our amazing sponsor, Midwest Fire. At Midwest Fire, they know better efficiency results in less waste, and it adds value to every truck they deliver. That's why they have worked hard to implement lean manufacturing processes throughout their factory. Lean manufacturing means a lower cost to build, with the savings passed on to you. To learn more, visit MidwestFire.com. Hello and welcome to episode 302 of the Situation Awareness Matters show. I'm your host, Rich Gassaway. The purpose of this program is to help to improve situational awareness and high-risk decision-making for individuals and teams who work in high-stress, high-consequence, time-compressed environments with changing conditions. The SA Matters mission is simple. We want to help you and the members of your team see the bad things coming in time to prevent bad outcomes. I'm coming to you today from my office in St. Paul, Minnesota. I've now been off the road for a month, but it all comes to an end tomorrow. Oh, sad, but happy. Get to go back on the road and share the message. Today's feature segment is sponsored by the Situational Awareness Matters Online Academy. The Academy trains and certifies your members on situational awareness skills essential for improving high-risk decision-making outcomes. To learn more about this highly acclaimed program, visit samatters.com and click on the Academy tab under the Training section at the top of the homepage. Okay, let's jump into today's feature segment, part 2 of my 2-part interview with Laverne Friesen, sharing his firsthand account of how work-related stress led him down a dark path towards suicide.
May 26th, I got the email saying, basically giving me heck for not finding the panic alarm disabled earlier. So after some consideration, I went to the union and I said, this is what they're doing. They haven't investigated this or anything like that. So they filed a grievance on my behalf. And on June 19th, we had a meeting and there were several members from HR, Human Resources there. My manager was there and a couple of union representatives were there. So we did a round of introductions and I said, all right, Laverne, tell us what's bugging you. And I didn't even finish my first sentence. I was crying uncontrollably. I've never cried like that before as an adult. I hope I don't ever. I couldn't keep it in. And I had to leave the room and I cried for probably 5 minutes. I couldn't even get my thoughts together. So came back in and had a meeting and they said, yeah, well, I guess we have to investigate it. And so they did that. They didn't start investigating till the end of July though. And I'd already given my resignation at that point. And so my manager comes up to me and he was in that meeting. He watched me cry. And he says to me, we've just kind of left you alone. and I had nothing. I didn't know. My mind was stuck between rinse and spin. I couldn't. And when my mind started to clear, all I could think about was, if I had died, that's on you. You knew this whole time that something was up, and you just left me alone. That's to me, that's the absolute worst thing that you could do to anyone. One of the first things my psychologist said to me was, "You're not alone." Right? We can't be like that to each other. We can't do that to each other. You know, whether we don't really like somebody or not, if you see somebody struggling, we have to deal with it. We have to go talk to them. We have to have that tough conversation.
Were you? Do you think you would have been mentally in a place that you would have been able to have that conversation, or because you weren't really having? I'm guessing not having those meaningful conversations with your wife. If somebody were to try to reach out to you, do you think you would have kind of reverted to that the kind of denial state of everything's fine, don't worry, I'm all good, kind of thing, or do you think that you might have opened up?
I don't know, truthfully, but at that time, all I wanted was somebody to come talk to me. That's all I wanted. I wanted somebody that was truly empathetic to come and ask me, "Are you okay? What's going on?" Through this whole process, I only ever got asked once if I was okay. And I was in our bullpen one day, and there's 10 employees milling around, and I'm having a discussion with my manager and my supervisor, and it went sideways pretty quick. And I told them, I said, I literally cannot work here anymore. I cannot work in this environment. And only 2 people followed up with me on that. And one was, "Hey man, I heard what you said to those guys. Good on you. They're pricks," or whatever. And the other one said, "Hey man, are you okay?" And, it's a text message. Wasn't somebody that I would be comfortable sharing my innermost feelings with. So, I just shrugged that one, or kind of played it off. Mm-hmm. I've had since then, because my troubles weren't over yet. I've had people that I didn't even know that well come up to me and ask me that question, and I've told them. Because when somebody is truly empathetic and that they want to listen to you, I think, I know for me personally, I'll talk to them. When somebody's not going to judge you, you'll talk to them. Right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, yeah, I started my new job. I was pretty happy. Paired up for the first couple months with another officer. And, being that good professional law enforcement officer, I was still going to attending court for my court commitments from the other municipality. And only a month into it, first week in September, I had court. And so I went to it, and I didn't really feel like going to court. Through my career, it's something that's required of law enforcement. It's a duty, but I always enjoyed it. It's kind of like a social club for law enforcement, right? You never know who you're going to run into and get to chat up at court. And on this day, September 6th, I didn't want to go. I just, something was there. I didn't really feel like going. And I'd gotten an email from my former employer saying, "We don't have anybody to drop the court packages off. You're just going to have to drop the paperwork back off at the office when you're done." And so, after I was finished in court, my partner drives me over to the old office, and I couldn't get out of the vehicle. I couldn't do it. It's embarrassing. There's another individual with me who doesn't know me, but knows that I don't want to get out of the vehicle. that's embarrassing, but I physically couldn't do it. I was too scared. I couldn't go back into that building. And so I ended up getting on my phone and figuring out somebody that was working, and I met up with them, and I gave the documents to him. And after that, I started getting quite a bit of an anxiety anytime I thought about anything to do with my former employer. And then a couple of weeks later in September, I went on a back mountain trip with a buddy of mine. I like going out in the mountains and just camping out. And this was to me, this was the big event. This was what was going to reset me, and everything was going to be okay. And so we were in quite a remote area, almost up to the Yukon border, and we were 30 kilometers off the highway. Was where our camp was set up. So I guess maybe 20 miles off the highway. And we spent 8 nights out there in a wall tent, fire and camping, and just had a great, what should have been a great time. But the whole time I'm out there, I'm worried about my family at home. I'm worried about the kids. They don't have their dad. I'm worried about my wife. And I'm just worried about everything. I'm worried about grizzly bears. It's not that fun. And so after that was over, I didn't feel like I'd been on vacation at all. I didn't have a reset. Now I'm starting to wonder. I'm like, man, like I've been gone for a while. I really should be starting to get better now. And time's going to heal everything, but I'm not getting any better. So for the next month or so, it was okay. I just kind of existed, I guess. Work was good, but I would still slip into hostility against my wife, and there's still lots of issues. And which kind of culminated on October 30th. I was first on scene to a 3-vehicle collision, and I was fine. I went there. I was, talking on the radio. Everything's good. I roll up on scene. I park. I get out of my vehicle, and this couple walks up to me with 2 younger boys, and both the boys are crying. They're not injured badly. They had superficial wounds. And I started to talk to them, and I lost my voice. I got a lump in my throat. I couldn't talk. I was scared I was going to start crying. My mind started racing. I was incapacitated. And I've been on hundreds of collision scenes throughout my career, and I've never, I was always cool, calm, collect. I always had, did what needed to be done. And I was the whole incident was quite terrifying for me. And so I managed to, stutter out some directions to these people. And I I proceeded further onto scene to kind of do an assessment. I'd beat all the other emergency services there. And there's a lady trapped in her vehicle. She's, moaning in pain. She's got, lacerations on her face. There's blood all over her. And so I'm trying to talk to her, and I can't talk to her. I just start kind of like crying, or I was scared I was going to cry. I had a lump in my throat. And in the back seat, there's a girl that's similar in age to our daughter, and she's crying because she's scared. And I can't even comfort her. I'm useless. I'm a guy in a high visibility jacket walking around the scene, and I'm completely useless. And it was terrifying. I realized then that this wasn't something that was just gonna pass with time. I was terrified. And so I went home and I started talking about it with my wife, and I said, I need help. We need to get some proper help. And we agreed that, yeah, definitely needed help. And so and I just describing the girl crying in the back seat, I broke down and I started weeping in front of my wife because I couldn't I couldn't describe it to her, but yet in the overall scheme of things, this was a very minor collision. Been to much more serious collisions or events, and this was quite minor, but yet the whole incident just incapacitated me. So we started making queries and started searching, trying to find the best psychiatrist or psychologist that could help me. My wife's lifelong friend is a psychologist, not here. So she did some research here, and she came across the psychologist that I ended up going seeing and said, "This is the lady you got to go see," which very busy person. So it took me a while to get in to see her. But the very next day after that collision, I went out. I do hunting, and well, I'm not very good at it. I try. I go out in the bush and I walk around, and it's nice and quiet out there, and I get to think, and so it's a good stress relief. So I had some trail cameras set up, and I hadn't had very much luck with them, but I had found the spot. I knew that I was going to have at least some good pictures on my camera. So the very next day I went out there and I went to get my trail camera, and I'd left it out there for about 2 or 3 weeks. And so I was pretty excited about what I was going to find on there. And I get out there, I go get my camera, and I see there's tracks, there's lots of sign right on the trail underneath my camera. So I was pretty excited. I get back to my truck and I start going through the pictures, and I had angled the camera high. And so I didn't have anything on it. And I can laugh at it now, but back then it overwhelmed me. And I was just overwhelmed. And such a minor thing, like you just positioned your camera a little bit off, and it's so minor, but I was so overwhelmed. And that was the last time that I had a suicidal thought. And I'm like, my rifle's right there. And I shrugged it off pretty quick, and I started driving home, and I said, I really need to talk to my wife. So I phoned her. I ended up parking on the side of the road. I was done. I was crying way too hard. And that's when I told her, without any doubt, that I'd had suicidal thoughts. And it went something like, those bleeping bleeps did this to me, so much so that when our daughter was sleeping on my chest, I was thinking of killing myself. And that was an eye-opener for her. And I think at that time we were both able to start moving forward together. When you're under that cloud of anxiety and depression, nothing works. So I ended up going to see my family doctor, and that didn't help. He said, just go seek services out in the community. And I wasn't very happy about that, because to get mental health in our area, mental health services, there's a long delay or a long waiting period. But, that's what I had to do. So I had to wait. In the meantime, my former employer started to realize that I was having issues with going to court for them. And they started to ratchet up some of their pressure, I guess, and they started to influence my new management team, or try to influence them. So I ended up having to have the "you hired a crazy guy" chat with them. It was quite hard. I put it off for as long as I could, and when I did, I brought my wife in with me, and we had the chat and kind of explained the situation to them, and they're very receptive. I couldn't believe it, because at this time I'm still stigmatizing mental health. I'm still stigmatizing, occupational stress injuries, right? They were very, very, very open. They understood. My wife had to do most of the talking. I couldn't talk, and she did very good. So with their support, I was able to start moving forward a little better. Fast forward to January, and my former employer is still ratcheting up pressure on me. I was trying to talk to them through my former union, because I felt that I still had a duty to go to court, but it was causing me so much anxiety that I had to look out for myself as well. And I couldn't understand what was happening, but I think that, their former golden child, who didn't like the union, had now got the union involved against them, and I don't think they liked that very much. And so they applied pressure in every which way they thought they could, and only stopped it after my psychologist sent them a very strongly worded letter, and that's when they stopped. And if that letter hadn't gone to the right people in that municipality, that activity would have never stopped. But I was finally able to get. Well, I'm going to go back to Christmas. I'm in a safe place at work. I'm in a safe environment. I believe that I can start, trying to grow. My anxiety is overwhelming though, and Christmas last year sucked. I love Christmas. My wife loves Christmas. Our whole family loves Christmas. The kids love Christmas. But on the 24th, I slipped into one of my moods of hostility, and I couldn't logically get myself out of it. And it's only thanks to intensive therapy that, I don't have hostility anymore. So early December, I was able to get into this psychologist who specializes in occupational stress. I left work. I had a late afternoon appointment with her. It was a 20-minute drive, and I cried the whole way over. I was so relieved. I knew that I was going to get help, and I cried the whole time, the whole drive. I had a 1-hour appointment with her. I cried for 2 hours. It took me 2 hours to tell her my story, and she's one of the best things that happened to me. I was finally able to get the help that I needed. Went through some intensive therapy. Part of the therapy was EMDR. I know you and I had talked about that here when I saw you. Essentially, you sit in front of well, first of all, I guess we need to know what EMDR stands for. Eye movement. You're going to have to help me out here with that one.
Eye movement desensitization and reprogramming.
Yes. And the movement of the eyes, my understanding, helps you reprogram and helps I guess, rewrite how you remember something. And so I went through that. The actual process seems very relaxing while you're doing it. You watch these little lines go across the screen, back and forth, back and forth. You slow your breathing down while you're thinking about, whatever's causing you the most stress. You relate that back to another incident, and there will be an incident in your past where you first felt that feeling that you're feeling. It can be quite intense because you are reliving a stressful or traumatic experience. But it's amazing how it works. And you can take a very traumatic incident and you can actually rewrite it as a positive experience in your life. And my healing progressed leaps and bounds after I was able to do that.
And how was that multiple sessions over months of time, or what was the timeline at which then you felt like you were, making the turn and it was being helpful to you?
Well, instant. So I think it was about 2 months in that she offered it up. You kind of have to get everything sorted first before you can do that. So I did one session. It was very helpful. I felt better instantly. It's exhausting though. That one session was exhausting. But I felt better instantly. Like,
wow.
I walked out of there smiling. However, there's likely more than one incident, or there's likely more than one stressor that you might have or trigger. And so about a month later, she said, well, I think maybe we should do some more EMDR. And I said, well, she said, what do you think about that? And I'm like, oh man, that was hard. And she said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll do 1 or 2 more sessions. And if this is still bothering you, then we'll do it. And I put in some work because it's exhausting, and it's so rewarding, but it's hard. And a lot of people don't do it because it is exhausting. Right. But the payoff is unbelievable. Yeah.
And so fast forward us to where you are today and how things have changed for you. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is kind of, as I would ask any of my near miss guests, is summarize your lessons learned. What were your key takeaways from it that you would want to share with others, and hopefully allow them to learn from your experience what might be helpful to them.
Absolutely. So I underwent therapy for quite a while. I started in January. I was in there every 2 weeks at a minimum since January, the first week or second week in January. There were several times along the way that I thought I was good. I thought I was better now. And, life really puts us in our place sometimes. I remember going in and seeing her about a month in or 2 months in, and actually a couple of weeks in, and she gave me a couple of tests to do. So I was filling out the one test, and I'm like, oh man, I am so much better. I'm like, 2 months ago, I would have been filling out the worst score on this test all the way down, all the way through the list. It was a anxiety test. And the next week she gives me my results, and I'm 1 point away from being clinical anxiety. And I thought I was doing so good. Um, it's amazing how far down we go. Anyway, I continued with therapy religiously. Kept going. Finally, in July, the last session I went to her, she said, "Well, what do you think? Just play it by ear." And I've um, been able to go on my own since then. I don't think you ever lose something like this. I'm not anxious anymore. I'm not depressed. I think I believe it's an injury, and I think there's residual from that forever. I'm a much stronger and a much better person now. I'm much nicer. I wouldn't wish this on anyone, and I would do anything in my power to prevent anybody from going through this. In August, my wife and I took the kids for a weekend getaway, and we went to an amusement park. We did some shopping, and then the first time in almost 2 years or more than 2 years, I was happy. I was truly happy. There was nothing bothering me. And I feel very strongly about trying to tell my story so other people can maybe learn from it. It's a horrible experience. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemies. In August or September, I posted my story to social media. I felt that I needed to get it out there. I think we need to start talking about mental illness a lot more. And the reaction was quite positive. I had a lot of people private message me saying, "Hey, thanks for doing it. I went through the same thing. I went through something similar." But one guy he said, "Man," he said, "I've been staying off social media because I've been going through a hard time and I can't handle it." And he said, "Today I opened Facebook and the first thing I see is your story." And he's like, "I started shaking reading your story because you're writing my story." He's like, "I am going through the exact same thing." He said, "I'm only 3/4 of the way through your story right now." He said, "I had to share this because people don't understand what's going on with me. They don't understand where the old me is." And to me, that was so powerful. My psychologist told me, she's a very busy lady. If I want an appointment, I'm looking at 2 or 3 weeks down the road. And she said that most of her clients are first responders. That tells me, and I don't live in a hugely populated area. That tells me that a lot of us are suffering, and we're not talking about it. And we're suffering in silence. Some of us are talking about it. My Facebook feed is filled with first responders that are dying in the line of duty through suicide. And that's another thing I actually wanted to mention in my story was in January, a friend of mine died from suicide. He was a senior firefighter with me when I was on the fire department. We were good friends, and he kind of faded away from the fire department, and there was all these reasons that why he had to leave. And looking back in hindsight, it's very clear why he left. He may not have had PTSD, but he had an occupational injury of some sort. And I wish I would have known then what I know now. But the day after I found out, another friend of mine on the fire department phoned me, and I was at work, and that's probably the peak of my anxiety about that time. And while I was on the phone with him at work, I started crying, and he said, "What's going on?" Because he I think he knew that I wasn't crying just for our friend. And so I explained my story to him, and he sounded so disappointed. He's like, "Why did you never call me? You can talk to me." I knew all along. He was one of the top people, if not the top person on my list for me to call. But we don't want to talk about it because nobody wants to admit they're the crazy guy, or, you know, and it's not. We're all suffering. And that was the big lesson that I learned, is we're all going through something. Everybody is battling something. You know, we might not be right now, but we will be. You know, life catches up to you. And the big question that I want everybody listening to take away from this is this: what are we doing to each other? What are we doing to each other in the name of going to work, in the name of supervision, in the name of management, in the name of rookie or probie, senior guy? You know, what are we doing to each other? Do we truly understand what we're doing to each other?
I suspect in many ways the answer is no.
It,
or we wouldn't, or you would think that righteous people wouldn't do and say some of the things that they do and say if they knew that it was having that kind of a effect. I truly believe, though, in all honesty, that there are some people out there in the world who have evil in their heart, and they say those things knowing that they're you know, that they're putting scars on people's hearts and souls. They're just they're evil people that do not care what they say or what the impact is. You know, I've had people say to me, "Well, I'm just a brutally honest person. I just say whatever's on my mind." Well, you know, we appreciate your honesty, but that doesn't give you a license to be so mean-spirited that you scar other people in the process, you know, and they think that's their license to be able to be that way.
I agree. And, you know, it's very hard, even if you are a nice person and you want to help, it's very hard starting that conversation, though. There was a lady kind of in the, I guess, peripheral of my social network, and I could see that I didn't know her very well, but I could see that maybe there was some anxiety there. And I talked about it with my wife, and I'm like, man, a lot of this looks like what I went through. And she's like, you have to talk to her. I'm like, you're right. And so I did. I was able to bring it up. I was right. She was fine, but even for myself, knowing how horrible it is, it's still hard to be able to start that conversation.
Yeah. It's so important.
It is. It really is. And because we always tell people, you know, if you're suffering, speak to somebody. Well, I knew better. I I didn't. And I think many people are in a very similar situation. They need somebody to come talk to them.
So, and I know you're not the psychologist. So
No.
you might have a good answer to the question I'm about to ask you. But how does somebody start that conversation with somebody that they think is hurting? You know, you go up to them and say, "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine." "Well, I'm here for you if you want to talk." "Okay, thanks." But then that person never engages you, but you know they're suffering, they're having problems, you know it. But if that person isn't willing to open up and have a conversation or accept that, or they never call you, how do you I don't know what the right word is. I'm struggling here. How do you force your way into their life to make them want to have that conversation with you? And, you could maybe, you don't have to speak from the psychologist's point of view. You can speak to this from the person who, was the firsthand, person who lived through this. How do we, the lay people, get people who are suffering like you were to engage us? If we try and you don't want to have those conversations.
Well, you can't force anyone to talk. And I actually have a couple of examples here that'll 4 different stories, I think that'll help that. When I was still suffering, I went and I took a mental health. Well, I took a few mental health courses, and in one of the courses, we were told to introduce ourselves. And so I introduced myself. I'm always a little hesitant, talking to people or telling strangers that I work in law enforcement. I thought about lying, but I didn't. I said what I did. And the guy beside me looks over and he's got this warm smile on his face. And he's like, "Oh, nice." Well, he's a firefighter for the same municipality that I work in. And a very genuine individual. And so I started, at that point I was starting to open up a little more, trying to talk about it. And I could tell instantly that he was very genuine, and he wanted to hear my story, and he wanted to help me. And so I was able to talk to him. Just after I posted my story to social media, a girl I worked with, I bumped into her in the office, and she's like, "Man, I never knew it was that bad. I knew you didn't like it there. I knew you didn't have a good time, but I never knew it was that bad." I'm like, "Well, it's because I didn't talk about it." And she's like, "How are you doing?" And I said, I'm good." And she's like, "No, seriously, how are you really doing?" And I was fine. I was good. But I got emotional just at her asking me that, because I knew that she wanted to truly know how I was doing. And I think that's something we need to portray, that we really want to know the truth. So many people ask that question and they don't want to know the answer. They want you to say, "I'm okay," so they can, they don't have to take any responsibility. With the lady that I spoke to, I went up to her and I said, "Listen, I went through a horrible time, and I see some of the things that I went through. I suspect I see some of them with you, and I just want to make sure you're okay." And I explained that I'd gone through anxiety, and then so that opened up that conversation. One of the big ones, though, that really changed me and changed the way I approach anybody at work. I've done thousands of traffic stops in my career, and I've stopped many, many people that are clearly having a bad day. They're trying not to, cry. They're struggling, and it's clearly different from somebody that might try to cry to get out of a ticket. And the first time that it happened to me after my struggle, I stopped a male, and of course, men were the, our ego gets in the way. We got to be so macho, especially around other men. And I could tell that this guy seemed to be having a really bad day, and looked like he was fighting to not cry. So I just said, "Hey, man to man, let's pause this for a second. How are you doing? Are you okay?" And the floodgates opened. He was more than happy to talk to me, and I ended up getting him some help that night, getting him some resources so he could go talk it out with a mental health professional. It's happened to me since then, and I tell them, I say, "Hey, pause, person to person, you look overwhelmed. How are you doing?" And when they're at that point, the floodgates open and they'll talk to you.
And you were a stranger to him.
Yeah, and I'm somebody in uniform, right? You always got, men have that thing. You got to act tough in front of law enforcement, right? But he was having a hard go, and I hope that I was able to portray that I actually wanted to help him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Nice. Is there anything you would have wanted to share that you didn't get the chance to share because I didn't ask the right question of you, or did we cover everything?
I think we covered most of it. As soon as we end the call, I'll be like, shaking my head, punching the wall. But
well, we're heading toward a 2-hour interview, so yeah, I think we've covered a pretty good chunk of it.
Yeah.
Thank you for gifting us with so much of your time and so much of the raw reality of what it is like to experience this firsthand and how it impacts you. There were several times when you were talking that I'm glad the camera was pointed on you and not pointed on me, because it was getting to me. Your composure amazes me, as I think that, okay, this is where he breaks down, but you didn't. I mean, you held well to explain a life's experience that truly just had to be gut wrenching, and you're good at telling the story, and in a way that I think will compel all of us to become better people, to be more compassionate, to ask for help even when the voice inside of our head says, I'm fine, no, it's okay. This was the first, by the way, you may not know, the first near miss interview that I have done that was related to mental health and suicide. All my previous interviews have all been emergency scene incident related, near misses related to, actual job performance of a task. But when you reached out to me and I read your story and you shared with me your social media post, I thought this meets every definition of a near miss. But this would have been a truly tragic outcome, or could have been a very tragic outcome. And I feel very relieved that it turned out as well as it did. I feel very blessed that we had the chance to meet each other when I was in Alberta doing the situational awareness program. And, they're really, the biggest part of our conversation really didn't tip me off to the fact that you had a story to tell. We were talking about a lot of things, but I didn't pick up on that until you sent me that follow-up email that said, here's my story. And I think it's worth sharing. And that's the whole reason this platform exists, is to give a place for people like you to tell a story like you just told that will hopefully prevent a tragedy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. If I may take another 30 seconds,
Sure.
I want to tell, if anybody out there is struggling, you will get through this. You will be much, much stronger, and you will be a much better person. I just wanted to relay one little quick story. Our oldest is now 5. She's in kindergarten. And this morning, I spent the morning at kindergarten with her. Every week they have a little helper, and that little helper can bring their parent with them. And she was so excited to have her daddy with her at kindergarten. And I had such an amazing time. And as I drove away, I started thinking about this podcast and thinking about my story. And I can't even touch on the what if. I'm just so happy. We're so happy. Just, talk to each other. And, if I may, the Project All In makes a challenge coin, and everybody in your squad can get one. There's 2 sides to it. The premise is if you're having a hard time, you put your challenge coin down on the table and your buddy knows you need to talk.
Oh.
And you know what? Everybody in my office, we all carry a challenge coin now. It's projectallin.ca, started by a couple firefighters, trying to help open conversations.
I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. I'm writing it down. Projectallin.ca.
Yeah. Anything we can do to help each other talk or talk to each other.
Thank you again to Laverne Friesen for sharing your amazing story. Remember, this was part 2 of a 2-part interview, so if you missed last week's show, be sure to swing back and catch the backstory to this mental health near miss. In case you weren't aware, I launched this show in 2014 with a purpose: to give a platform to those who've had near-miss events to share their stories. When I'm on the road delivering situational awareness classes, the attendees often share amazing near-miss stories with the class. Those stories motivated me to launch this podcast, so their lessons learned could be shared with a bigger audience, you. The Situational Awareness Show, podcasted as SA Matters Radio, and our companion video program, SA Matters TV on YouTube, along with other videos we have posted there, have enjoyed more than 1 million views, listens, and downloads. I'm so honored to be able to provide this free platform for those incredible lessons to be shared. If you like our show, do me a solid favor and please consider subscribing. For the audio version of the show, search for the SA Matters Radio on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and iHeartRadio. For the video version of the show, search and subscribe to SA Matters TV on YouTube. Since 2007, our instructional team and consultants have helped more than 1,300 organizations and have trained over 86,000 individuals to improve high-risk decision-making. This has included fire, police, EMS, industry, military, business, medical, utility, transportation, aviation, energy production, biotechnology, and more. If someone you know works in a high-risk, high-consequence decision-making environment, then we are here to help to improve their safety and to help them accomplish the most important mission of all, and that's to go home from work whole and healthy every day to the ones who love them. I'd like to take a moment to honor and thank recent program and consulting clients: the Florida Fire Chiefs Association, ExxonMobil's North American operations, the Sandoval County Fire and Rescue Department in Albuquerque, New Mexico. If you're interested in attending a program, here's where we're going to be upcoming. January 8th at the Novelis Corporation in Oswego, New York. January 11th at the Lincoln County Fire Chiefs Association in Denver, North Carolina. January 30th at the Evans Fire Department in Evans, Colorado. February 5 at the Miami Valley Fire and Rescue Conference in Dayton, Ohio. February 7 and 8th at the South Carolina Fire Chiefs Association in Columbia, South Carolina. February 24 through 27 at Firehouse World Conference in Las Vegas, Nevada. If you want to see the locations of all the upcoming events, just head over to our website, samatters.com, and click on the red tab labeled Upcoming Events Schedule. The tab is about halfway down the homepage. If you're interested in talking with me about conducting situational awareness assessment for your company or hosting a training program for your team, just click on the Contact Us tab at the top of the homepage and I will give you a call. And remember to check the show notes for how to subscribe to our free newsletter and how to follow us on social media. There we share ideas about how to improve situational awareness, how to make better decisions under stress, and how to improve the skills of critical thinking and resilient problem solving. Well, that's it. Episode 302 of the Situation Awareness Matters show is complete. Thank you again to my guest, Laverne Friesen. Thank you to our platinum sponsor, Midwest Fire. Thank you to our feature segment sponsor, the Situation Awareness Matters Online Academy. Thank you to our associate sponsor, Chief Miller. And most importantly, thank you, the listeners and viewers of this show, for sharing some of your valuable time with me today. I really appreciate your support of the SA Matters mission. Be safe out there, and may the peace of the Lord and strong situational awareness be with you always.
You've been listening to the Situational Awareness Matters radio show with Dr. Richard B. Gassaway. If you are interested in learning more about situational awareness, human factors, and decision-making under stress, visit samatters.com. If you are interested in booking Dr. Gassaway for an upcoming event, visit his personal website at richgassaway.com.